Tony Vaughan to move the motion.
Mr. Stringer, it is always a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I beg to move that this House has considered whether social media should be banned for children under the age of 16. Mr. Stringer, I'd like to start by thanking Kim Campbell, who is the petitioner and is sitting in the public gallery, for submitting this petition, which has gained over 130,000 signatures. Kim believes that the answer to the question posed is yes. Now, Mr. Stringer, when I asked my two boys, who are aged 14 and 10, whether social media should be banned for children, their answer was a predictable no, of course. But when you ask the same question of UK adults, the overwhelming majority respond yes. 75% of them, in fact, according to a poll published last month, based on a survey of 2,000 adults, I think. On the same theme, I asked my constituents in Folkestone and Hyde last week whether smartphones should be banned in schools, and almost 2,000 responded. And again, 75% thought that they should. And I should say that many of the 24% who thought that they shouldn't looked to me like many of them were still at school themselves. Are adults imagining that there is a problem here? Do we just not understand our young people? I've heard it said more than once that most adults don't see how important social media is to young people's social and digital identity, that we can't teach boundaries unless if you ban access to these apps altogether. Now, I totally agree that social media can be a space where young people can build positive relationships with their peers, reduce loneliness, improve coping skills, and improve general knowledge and creativity. Social media can, of course, be a wonderful tool, but it's currently a wild west where there is too much harmful content. Yes.
Thank you very much for giving way for the intervention. Would you agree with me that, given where we are with social media today, that legislation has just not kept up with the pace of change, and actually we are so far behind when it comes to being able to tackle with this issue, given how far social media usage is, and yet the pace of change in terms of our legislation has just not met that demand?
The honourable friend raises an interesting point. I mean, the legislative regime we have at the moment, as I'll come on to say, will require risk assessments. Now, the state of the evidence, as it was when the Online Safety Act was being passed, is different to the evidence that we now have today. And so the nature of those assessments, the nature of the risks, necessarily is different. And as I'll come on to say, we need to look at that on a continual basis. But as I say, social media can be a wonderful tool, but it's become a wild west where there's too much harmful content being pushed onto young people, and social media companies are simply not doing enough to tackle it. The sad fact of the matter is that social media is pushing content that radicalises, catalyses mental health crises, and is highly addictive. The head of MI5, Ken McCallum, last month raised alarm about how extremist ideologies are reaching children as young as 12 through social media platforms, and young people radicalised by social media are on their books. This, of course, is a growing threat to national security. Mental health crises. We're seeing skyrocketing rates of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and even suicide among adolescents.
My honourable friend give way?
Yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and congratulating him on an excellent speech. Does he agree with me that on that point on mental health and well-being, students locally from Brighton Hill School in my constituency recently raised the significant impact that social media was having on their mental health and well-being? And does he agree with me that actually it's not just adults that are concerned, it is young people, and that they should be involved in this review of legislation because it is them that is having where it's having the most detrimental impact on their health and well-being?
I completely agree with my honourable friend and congratulate his constituents, the children in his constituency, for taking a very sensible approach. And of course, even we're seeing that, and I think it's interesting that children themselves are coming forward and saying this because they are perhaps seeing the harms that I'm talking about and want to do something about it. We've seen cases where children as young as 14 have taken their own lives after being bullied or exposed to harmful online content. During the preparation for this debate, I was informed by the NSPCC that there is an online website posing as a community that encourages suicide. This is the dark and depressing side of the online world that we have to do more to tackle. And what about addiction? Social media platforms are designed to exploit vulnerabilities in our young people. Algorithms push harmful content, be it body image issues or self-harm videos or anxiety videos, directly onto their feeds. And a recent survey showed that on TikTok, the algorithm was 4,343% more likely to show toxic eating disorder content to users who were already vulnerable to such issues. Many of you will have seen the Channel 4 documentary Swiped, where a secondary school took the phones of Year 8 pupils for 12 weeks to see what happened, and the results were impressive. Children talked to their friends more, reported less anxiety, and were more focused in class. Yes.
I wonder if my honourable friend would agree with me that given that 70% of youth services and investment has been slashed since 2010, that actually we need to make sure that we're actually providing opportunities aside from school where children actually can interact before taking away one of the few places they actually do have to spend time with their peers now.
My honourable friend raises a really important point. This can't be about shutting down avenues for young people to socialise with each other. And so whatever action is taken to make it harder for young people to access social media, we have to make sure that other things are going on in society so they don't feel this is the only place they can go to socialise. The petitioner's view, as I said, is that we should ban access to social media until children are 16. When I spoke to the NSPCC before this debate, their position is that they do not think an outright ban is the answer. Without changing the software or the devices, a ban on children using social media without more would be unenforceable. The NSPCC's view is that a ban would push children into unregulated and more dangerous online spaces. But what about the Online Safety Act? Does that do enough? Several people I spoke to in preparing for this debate think that it does, like requirements for social media companies to conduct children's access assessments to determine whether children are likely to access their platform, and like online age assurance measures, which require social media companies to assess whether their services are likely to be accessed by children and adopt robust methods such as photo ID matching, facial age estimation and mobile network checks. Of course, these age assurance measures are right, but groups such as Smartphone-Free Childhood do not believe that risk assessment and the Online Safety Act more broadly go far enough. They advocate for an approach not of risk assessment and risk reduction methods. They say that the onus should be on the social media companies to demonstrate that their apps are safe for children to use, and if they can't, then their app cannot be used by children. And this seems to be the opposite of the onus being on the regulator to prove that an app is dangerous or harmful. Now, it may well be that this would be something the Code of Practice under the Online Safety Act could do. It would require tightening the Code of Practice, and it would be useful to know from the Minister whether he agrees that the Act would be capable of reversing that burden, as well as whether we ought to perhaps think about those methods. Yes.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Does he agree with me that legislation can go so far, but actually there is a broader responsibility for all of us as adults in society, and for many of us, myself included, as parents, to make sure not only that we're monitoring what our children are using and how they're using it, but also our own habits too. And I think specifically of a head teacher in my constituency of Mid-Sussex who was alarmed that she'd had to write to her parents telling them that when they're collecting their infants from the playground to put their phones away, have eye contact with their children, engage with their children. Thank you.
Thank the honourable member for her intervention. She raises a common sense point. If we are going to advocate for change, we have to lead by example. But it might be said that the harms that we're talking about are somewhat a separate issue to that. Of course, we need to take responsibility, but where we have social media companies who are pushing content which is objectively dangerous, we need to have the conversation that we are having today about how the system and how social media companies should be forced to make sure that that space is a safe one. Now, yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and for the parents who brought this petition. As ever, it feels like they're often way ahead of us as legislators when it comes to issues affecting children's safety. My honourable friend is doing a very good job, I think, of setting out some of the possible risks that the Online Safety Act won't fully be able to mitigate some of the challenges we're seeing today. And the robust measures around consideration about the age of access to social media is, I think, a timely and important one about how we can think through the best way of protecting young people from possible exposure to online harm. On top of that, though, recognising that some exposure is always likely to be there, it's important too, would you agree, to make sure that we're thinking about how through the curriculum review we can best empower children, young people and their parents to be best set up to protect themselves from harm where they are exposed to it, even with the stronger regulations we're looking to put in place.
I completely agree with my honourable friend. This has to be, we're not going to protect children just by government or just through social media and expecting parents to do nothing. Of course, parents are going to have to do our part. But interestingly on this point, I was going to say that an important measure, potential measure, is the approach put forward by my honourable friend, the member for Whitehaven and Workington, in his private member's bill, the Safer Phones Bill. And his concept, which I hope to hear more about in the course of this debate, is about raising the age of data consent from 13 to 16. So you essentially stop the social media companies being able to harvest data and keep feeding the kind of content that is going to be harmful. Which seems to me to be a no-brainer. But very briefly, I want to talk about smartphones in schools, because that is a closely connected issue to the one that is posed by the petitioner. Many teachers and parents that I've talked to have believed that this never seen, never heard guidance from the government, introduced under the previous government, I should say, isn't working, where we have students still using phones during break time and often during lessons, and the problems that that causes are significant. And I've had so many teachers say to me, this takes up so much time, it's a huge distraction, and it interferes with learning. Yes.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Prior to entering Parliament, I worked for JDRF, the Type 1 Diabetes charity, and one of the issues that came to light when this was previously proposed by the government was the fact that children who might need to use their phones to monitor their Type 1 diabetes or have carers' responsibilities need to have an exemption. This creates a stigma between children who might have a medical requirement to use a mobile device and those who don't. And how would you see this interact with that?
Well, I think every school has to comply with the Equality Act, and so whatever policy a school puts in place, then one would have to check that what they're doing is in compliance with the law. And so those sort of exception situations would obviously have to be looked at very, very carefully. What I was going to say is that we don't have to look far to see examples of local areas that have banned smartphones in schools, like in the London Borough of Barnet. Yes.
I thank my honourable friend for raising the action that's taken place in the London Borough of Barnet, where I have the honour of being one of the 3 members of Parliament. I've been working closely with local teachers in primary schools and in secondary schools, and the fantastic smartphone-free campaign in North London, led by a wonderful volunteer called Nova. And we now have 103 primary schools in the borough committing to going smartphone-free from September, and every secondary school too, saying that they will start from year 7 and upwards, some going further and faster, to go smartphone-free in secondaries. And that's not just not seen and not heard, but it's actually head teachers working together, so they have safety in numbers, backed up by their MPs, to say that unless there are specific exemptions that apply, smartphones will not even be allowed on the premises. And to your earlier point, if I may, what's also been really encouraging is that some teachers are going further and saying that parents shouldn't be allowed to use smartphones on the grounds too, for those reasons that you were pointing out. But thank you for raising Barnet. It's been fantastic to work with the campaign locally and to support parents and young children in my constituency.
Well, I congratulate my honourable friend for his activism and his organising on this issue, and I know he's played a big role in the outcomes that he has just described. And an example more local to my constituency of Folkestone and Hythe is a policy designed by the John Wallace Academy in Ashford in Kent, where students put their mobile phones in a locked pouch during the day, and the principal, Mr McBeath, had intended that the rule would limit disruption in school and support safeguarding. I, for one, am going to be advocating for this whenever I speak to heads in Folkestone and Hythe. The work being done by Smartphone Free Childhood nationally and their group in Folkestone and Hythe, I commend, and I think it's really important to work closely with everyone involved to try to address the problems that social media use is creating for our young people. So I am conscious of all the other people that want to speak today, as well as the Minister. But I have a couple of questions for the Minister when we ultimately get to them, which are essentially, and I've raised one of them already, but whether the Minister believes that the Code of Practice is likely to be robust enough in the coming years as we see more evidence of the harms caused by social media and what changes may be needed as time goes by. And also whether he thinks Ofcom is striking the right balance between safeguarding children from harm and ensuring economic proportionality. And if there's anything that Ofcom is doing or can do to tackle the small but high-risk online sites that act as online communities that encourage things like suicide that I referred to earlier. And what measures can the government, lastly, measures the government can take to get ahead of AI development to ensure that children can be effectively protected from the risk posed by AI so that our politics can forge once again with technical progress. But anyway, it's enough from me, and I look forward to hearing others' contributions.